Okay, I'm back again. I'm here to read about George and Marina, the Duke and Duchess of Kent. And we are reading today Chapter 9, The Private Lives. This takes place in 1935. This is when George and Marina were first married. And these are those few years just before the abdication of King Edward VIII. So I'm going to get started. Chapter 9, Private Lives. It was coincidentally while they were on honeymoon in the Caribbean in March 1935 that George and Marina first met America's 32nd president in person. Then, in his second year in office, Franklin D. Roosevelt was visiting Nassau aboard Vincent Astor's yacht, Normal. Perhaps because his curiosity had been aroused by Lincoln McVeigh's letter, or simply because they happened to be in the same place at the same time. The president invited the Duke and the Duchess to lunch with him. To many Americans at that time who seemed to think that Britain and the British had not progressed much beyond gaslighting and horse-drawn omnibuses, the general concept of royalty was no more advanced. Nevertheless, if Prince Roosevelt had expected George and Marina to be courteous visitors from an antediluvian world, he was to be pleasantly surprised. In them, he found spontaneity coupled with intellect and unaffected charm, qualities which he considered to be very attractive. Equally, if little more than diplomatic niceties on the part that had led the Duke and the Duchess to accept the president's invitation, they too were to be captivated. Almost from the moment they met on the 27th of March, a cordial friendship was established. So much so that when they parted later that afternoon, there was no doubting the sincerity of the president's invitation to come and see me in Washington. So taken were the Duke and Duchess from their part that the same evening Prince George cabled Roosevelt aboard the Norma. "My wife and I will always retain the happiest memories of our delightful, informal meeting today. We both wish you health, happiness, and a successful administration, and look forward to seeing you again in the near future." The Kents' protracted honeymoon finally came to an end when they arrived back in London on the 14th of April and drove to Windsor, where they stayed for a few days before moving into their new home. At number 3 Belgrave Square, it was one of tall, uniformly white terrace houses that the famous 19th century builder and architect Thomas Cubitt built around a central garden for the second Earl Grosvenor in 1820. A century later, number 3 was owned by Lady Juliet Duff, daughter of the celebrated Marchioness of Ripon, famous for dazzling every London drawing room with her wit, good looks, and energy, and it was Lady Juliet who leased the house to the Duke and Duchess with the generous provision that they would redecorate and refurbish as they wished. For Prince George, with his instinctive flair for interior decorations, the temptation to make changes was irresistible. His sense of decorative values, James Wentworth Day wrote, was so sure that he could order silks, brocades, chintzes, and colors with an eye and appreciation of a woman. Even Marina had to admit that she left everything to her husband's judgment. Maybelle, Countess of Verley, recalled, "In the 1930s, I often dined at the Duke and the Duchess of Kent's house in Belgrave Square. I was always impressed, not so much by the externals of happiness, the brilliance of the conversation, the beautifully arranged rooms, and the perfectly chosen meal, as by the deeper harmony of two temperaments." Once I complimented the Duchess on the dinner, she laughed, I am really a very bad hostess. I must confess that I didn't know what we were going to eat tonight until the food appeared. My husband my husband chose the dinner and the wine and the flowers and everything else. He enjoys doing it, so I will always leave the household affairs to him. I let him make all the decisions over furniture and decorations. He has a wonderful sense of color and design. For a woman like Marina, who is far from submissive by nature, taking a back seat in this way was a considerable compliment to the talents of her husband. Remember, Marina had her own design flair. She had her own instincts for fashion, but George was so good. She's like, "Oh, have at it, George. You're really good." Before long, George had devised new color schemes for the rooms using a wide range of skillful blended pastel shades, both to enhance the period and contemporary furnishings and to act as a subtle backdrop to his collection of pictures and objects d'art. The house was not without its more dramatic touches. However, it had been said that, in keeping with the assertively modern style, as his historian Bevis Hillard describes, the prevalent Art Deco look, Marina's own bathroom was decorated in black and silver, a variation from Juliet Duff's original theme of black and gold, while her bedroom featured a full-length mirrored alcove and neoclassical director bed beneath a striped canopy of peach and green. While George was the master planner of the pair, Princess Marina was not without her likes and dislikes. Indeed, by casually remarking that she would not care for her house to look like a bar, she unwittingly dampened the popular trend for chrome furniture and what were described as the razzle-dazzle cushions and curtains. Of more significance was the influence she had on women's fashion and lifestyle. All noted for her elegance, she started a craze for small pillbox hats and turbans, with or without the addition of feathers and net veiling, and like the present Princess Royale during her early 1970s, created a vogue for the wide-brimmed hats. Marina blue was a shade named in her honor. Her hairstyles were copied, and so it was said, women took up smoking simply because it became known that Marina smoked. She was responsible for helping make trousers acceptable among respectable women, something that had been previously considered a fashion taboo, and she did everything to revive a sustainable interest in cotton. Well, this gets really interesting because this next part, you know, again, she did everything to revive a sustainable interest in cotton. Look what she did. And I think it's to promote the cotton industry in Britain. So, and she did remarkably have an influence on that. Again, this is one of the things that the royals do is they promote certain industries and certain charities and certain, areas that need help. And this is one of their virtues, their present day virtues of today. When she first came to England, one unnamed textile manufacturer was quoted as saying at the time, "No real smart woman would have worn a cotton dress." But the Duke told her of the Depression in Lancaster and the desperate poverty of many of the people. She asked her dressmaker to design cotton frocks for her, and she wore them until the fashion was firmly established. Remember, this is set like in a time of right after the Great Depression of World War and after World War One. I mean, I know we had the Roaring '20s, but after the Great Depression, which was a global impact. It, one of the things that was important for these royals was to help revive these industries. Princess Marina's interest in clothes and her own ability as a needlewoman had originally surfaced many years before in Paris when she would make dresses to her own design. According to Jennifer Ellis, writing in the early 1950s, the Duchess had three secrets for successful dressing. One, she never let herself be influenced by the fact that something is the latest style if she does not think it would suit her. Two, she never minds being seen in the same dress several times. And three, she always chooses clothes that are interchangeable. In her wardrobe, no hat goes with just one pair of shoes, no other, and most of her scarves and stoles have reversible linings. Later, during the Second World War, when the clothing coupons ruled out even the smallest of extravagances, Marina's resourcefulness and versatility were said to have led her to make several summer dresses from materials which had been bought before the war for curtains. One of the greatest tributes to the princess's sense of style was made by the late courtier John Kavanagh, who had not only created many of her most successful outfits, but who would design the wedding dresses for her daughter-in-law, Catherine Worsley, when she married the present Duke of Kent in 1961, and of her daughter Alexandra when she married 2 years later. To me, Kavanagh, who had begun his career under Edward Molyneux in Paris, told the present writer Princess Marina was sheer magic. She personified superb elegance. Later, she was often my inspiration. She was, from the word go, the woman I wanted to dress more than any other in the world. While style and elegance were inherent in Princess Marina as in no other British royal lady at the time, one aspect of her look jarred with her mother-in-law. Quite early on, Queen Mary made it known that George V did not like Marina's painting on her fingernails. And so Marina replied, "Your George might not like it," the princess said, "but mine does." The subject was never mentioned again. I thought that was that took bravery. But that was Marina. She had that element of, gumption in her. It was at 3 Belgrave Square on 9 October 1935, the Duchess of Kent gave birth to her first of her three children. By the time she and George had returned from the honeymoon, Marina was already 3 months pregnant. And when it came to redecorating their new home, the Duke, perhaps because of the birth of a son, chose a blue and white color scheme for the top floor nursery. Yeah, he was anticipating the birth of their first child to be a son. So, at the beginning of October, Marina's parents came to London for the birth of their first Kent grandchild, whose arrival was then expected on the 16th of the month. Among Prince and Princess Nicholas's first visitors was Chips Channing, George and Marina's neighbor in Belgrave Square. On the 7th of October, he noted in his diary, "I went to Claridge's to have tea with the Nicholases of Greece. The Duchess of Kent was there in a brown dress and much bejeweled and rather large. She was sweetness itself, but she has not become in the least English." At one point, the Grand Duchess, Princess Nicholas, sent her daughter into the room to fetch her spectacles, and the Duchess went meekly. "She has been well brought up in the old-fashioned, affectionate way." Shannon, who also had a keen eye for the men, and in his own words, found the Duke of Kent altogether irresistible, followed Marina's pregnancy with great interest, partly out of friendship and partly because of his own wife. The former, Lady Honor Guinness, was expecting their first and only child at much the same time. In the event, and to Shannon's uncontrollable delight, both Marina and Honor gave birth on the very same day. On the evening of October 8th, when it became clear that the Duchess's baby would be born at any time, Fleet Street, then home to England's national newspaper industry, dispatched reporters and photographers to 3 Belgrave Square, where they had all assembled in one of the ground floor rooms. Shortly before midnight, the Duke of Kent put his head around the door. "I just thought I'd tell you that some hot coffee is being sent into you," he said. "After that, I'm afraid the kitchens will be closed, but there'll be some on duty just after 6 who will get you somewhere for breakfast." Then he added, "I do hope it will be over soon. I don't think I could stand much more of this." The newsman didn't have to wait for breakfast. At 2:15 a.m., Princess Marina gave birth to a son, Edward George Nicholas Paul Patrick, as the boy was christened at Buckingham Palace on 20 November. It was King George and Queen Mary's 5th grandchild, and to add to their pleasure, he was born in what was an especially memorable year for the royal family. At St. Paul's Cathedral on 6 May, the nation celebrated the Silver Jubilee of George V's reign. That 6th of May is quite a significant time, I think, for the royals, because that's when Charles had his coronation, so maybe that had meaning, at least to Charles. An occasion of the greatest pomp and ceremony, it was, in which Marina was again singled out by the press for the elegance of her creamy fawn outfit and vast, wide-brimmed, ostrich feather-adorned hat. Later, just a month after the birth of Prince Edward of Kent, yet another royal occasion caught the nation's imagination. This time, it was the wedding at Buckingham Palace on 6 November of George's brother. Prince Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, and Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott, daughter of the 7th Duke of Buccleuch, who, like her new sister-in-law Elizabeth, Duchess of York, was the scion of notable Scottish house. Yeah, that's a story, the Gloucester story, especially Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott, her and the marriage. I mean, that's a whole nother, the Gloucesters, which is why I'm reading this book, so people will understand how much they support and help the monarchy. The Kents and the Gloucesters, I mean, they're really, like, I wouldn't say they're my favorite, but they along with Andrew, Edward and Sophie and Princess Anne, what they do in support of their brother, who is the monarch, whether it be Charles or whether it's going to be William, it's very, very significant. So, and they managed to, in the public eye, they managed to raise their children. But I think Marina's story is so interesting because her husband passed away, and it was, according to this book, a good marriage. It was their temperaments just really worked well together. Their design, their fashion flair, it all just worked really well. So, anyway, like George and Marina, Harry and Alice were to be married in Westminster Abbey. But the death from cancer of the bride's father 18 days before, and the king's own fragile health, meant a change of plan and a change of venue. Unlike George and Marina, there was to be no prolonged and self-indulgent honeymoon, as the new Duchess of Gloucester would one day write in her memoirs. The Duke of Kent's recent honeymoon had been considered too extravagant, so we were told to spend ours quietly in England. Yeah, I read that in the Gloucester book. They had to keep their honeymoon expenses low and on the down low. So, yeah, anytime the royals get too extravagant, the people don't like it. So, within the space of 6 months, the king celebrated his silver jubilee, the birth of his 3rd grandson, and the marriage of his third son. But the happiness each of those events had brought him was marred by the death of his favorite sister, Princess Victoria. Born on the 6th of July, Toria was the second of Edward VII's three daughters and the only one of them not to have been married. That she was to die an embittered spinster was due entirely to the fact that her mother, Queen Alexandra, kept her at home to act as her companion. Yet Toria, who ached for romance and love, was not without her suitors. Among them was the widow and considerably older Lord Rosebery. Another was the again much older Admiral Lord Fisher, who was to write of her in her early middle age. Princess Victoria, who used to be scaggy, lanky, and anemic, has developed into an opulent figure with a rosy, plump face. She looked very handsome, and I told her so. Her tall figure makes her the most imposing now. I guess that's a compliment for you look really good. You look good now. You outgrew your, middle school look. As a result of being cast in the role of unmarried daughter, shuffling with her mother between Marlborough House in London and Sandringham in Norfolk, Princess Victoria grew old before her time, becoming a vaguely eccentric and seeking solace in ill health, real or imagined. When Queen Alexandra died in 1925, Toria by now was age 57. She went for the very first time in her life in search of a home of her own. She found what she was looking for in a mid-Victorian, multi-gabled house north of the village of Ivor in Buckinghamshire, called the Coppins. Oh, the Coppins. That's the house the Kents lived in. The prefix was eventually dropped, and the house became known simply as Coppins, lending structure, if not purpose, to the princess's otherwise lonely existence were the closeness of her relationship with her brother George V and the interest she took in village life. A familiar figure in Ivor, where she played the part of Lady Bountiful to perfection, including having become president of Ivor Horticulture Society, Toria would often visit the local school, but rarely, if ever, went inside. Instead, she would stand in the playground, peering through the classroom windows, waving and calling to the children. Almost every day, Princess Victoria and her brother would speak on the telephone. There's one story which, apart from being amusing, provides an insight into the very close bond she shared with the king. Having put through a call to him, the princess heard a click and shouted down the line, "Is that you, you old bugger?" To which a startled palace telephonist replied, "I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness. His Majesty is not yet on the line." Oh, Prince. The shock of the Princess Victoria's death on 3 December 1935 at the age of 67 is often said to have been hastened by the end of the king's own life. Oh, that's sad. In failing health for some years, George V canceled the state opening of Parliament, and shortly after Toria's funeral at Frogmore and the private home park at Windsor, retired to Sandringham. Shortly afterwards, the king made what was to be his final Christmas broadcast to the empire. Planted a cedar tree in front of the Sandringham house, rode his fat little shooting pony around the estate, and as he wrote in his diary, saw my Kent grandson in his bath. On 12 January, the king, breathless, lethargic, and feeling generally unwell, took to his bed. He died 8 days later at 11:55 p.m. on Monday, January 20th. For 5 days, the remains of King George V lay in state at Westminster Hall, the oldest surviving part of the famed side palace of Westminster, otherwise known as the House of Parliament. In central London, it was there at midnight on 27 January, the day before the king's funeral at Windsor, that the Duke of Kent and his three brothers, David, the new King Edward VIII, Bertie, Duke of York, and Henry, Duke of Gloucester, paid a unique tribute to their father. Dressed in a ceremonial uniform and with swords reversed and heads bowed, they replaced officers of the household brigade to take up one of the 20-minute watches observed at the foot of the catafalque on which the coffin rested. Queen Mary was so moved by her son's gesture that she commissioned F.E. Beresford to commemorate the scene in a painting known as The Vigil of the Princes. That is interesting. So, okay, this says this is a unique tribute. So that's quite interesting because they do that now with like King George VI. They did it with with Queen Elizabeth. They did it. The Vigil of the Princes, when the children stand around the coffin and pay a moving gesture. It really is a very moving gesture to the passing monarch. So it was so nice to see when Queen Elizabeth died. I've seen it with, in movies with King George VI. Of course, he had the daughters and they just, did their tribute. But Queen Elizabeth, when she passed, you saw Princess Anne, you saw King Charles, you saw Andrew, you saw Prince Edward, and, of course, Andrew was wearing his uniform, and that was a point of discussion with some people, but it really was so moving to see the children at Queen Elizabeth's and then to see the grandchildren. That has never been done before that I know of. So anyway, that's the end of that. That is the end of the chapter. So it was so. This is where it really takes off. So we're going to go into the next coming years, and this is what they call the year of the three kings.